On Wednesday, July 21st, 2010, the very independent and very Danish game developer Playdead released the abundantly somber, shockingly violent, and beautifully monochrome puzzle platformer Limbo onto the Xbox Live Arcade. On Wednesday, July 21st, 2010, I was probably in my parents' basement sitting on my mom's bright pink exercise ball playing the Wii's remake of GoldenEye 007, not realizing or caring that the game I was barely getting through was actually just a port of a much more classic and way more memorable game released for the N64 about 13 years prior, and I played that remake so much. Hello there, Internet, how are you? Welcome to a channel in which I, your very talkative protagonist, ushers you through my journey on the path of quitting video games. How will I quit video games, you ask? Well, I do like companions who ask questions. I will be playing every single game I own to complete completion and then compiling every single thought I have about said game in a video essay so that you can enjoy saying goodbye to these games with me. Today, we'll be talking about the classic indie darling, Limbo. Before we get into the game, however, let's talk about a little bit history of the game. While working at a large video game development company, a man named Arndt Jensen, I really hope I'm pronouncing that right, and if I'm not, I apologize for my Americanness, suddenly had an idea for a dark and somber game, and soon he decided to create the game by himself, until realizing that in order to make his dream game a reality, that he's gonna need to hire more people, and so he created Playdead with Dino Patti, one of, and I'm not joking about this, the most, and I'm very serious when I say this, handsome game developers I've personally ever seen. Like this dude creates games. What is in the water in Denmark? God, his cheekbone. Sorry, what are we talking about? They had an idea, got a bunch of money, created a game, the game did well. Hi, welcome to my channel where I summarize game history in one sentence. Tune in next week about the fall of Rome. Funnily enough, Limbo has about an equally as sparse history with me. It genuinely surprised me to discover that Limbo was released in 2010. Because, I mean, dude, 2010 was so far away in the backlog of my video game history that it reshapes my mind just to try and remember what I thought about video games back then. Like, I don't think Limbo really showed up on my radar until maybe 2012 or 2013. The only reason that it did show up on my radar in the first place is because that's around the time that I started to get very interested in this crazy unheard of website called YouTube. Maybe you've heard of it. And between my religious watchings of Watch Mojo and Rooster Teeth, I don't really remember a lot of what was being discussed about the game at the time, but I very much so do remember that the game was being discussed a lot. I have these vague memories of YouTubers talking about the shocking amount of child death and how the spider is one of the scariest video game monsters anyone could have ever come across at the time, and of course they mentioned this game's hauntingly beautiful visuals. The only other time I really remember talking about Limbo before pulling its name card from a bright orange Peruvian beanie, which one of my lovely viewers has pointed out that in Peru they're actually called chullos, gracias Percy, me gusto mucho más así, was when I almost bought it back in October of 2016. You see, back in the days of my youth before I was told what it means to be a man, I was very irresponsible with money and would very rarely put anything into my savings account because I had it in my head that if I didn't spend all the money I had immediately, then it would just go to waste. Because why would anyone need money? I usually don't like to say things in absolutes, but that was very stupid of me. You see, I had $10 burning a hole into my teenage pocket, and I had decided that I was going to buy one of two games on Steam. One of the choices was, of course, the game we are talking about right now, and the other game I cannot disclose because, you see, this channel is supposed to be shrouded in mystery, so if I tell you any game in my past catalog, then obviously you know that that game will eventually be mentioned on this channel. And I don't want that. I kind of like it when you guys are on your toes. Why give you answers when I can give you Nothing. So perplexed by this useless decision, I went to my older brother and asked him to help me decide. I described this game as an artistic puzzle game with some light horror elements, and my brother told me to choose the other game. So I did. And I never looked back. Until, in June of 2019, I was wandering through the shelves of a very respectable, independently owned video game store, and honestly, it disheartens me to tell you that I won't say the name of said very respectable, independently owned video game store because of the aforementioned mystery, but as I walked through the hollowed halls of shelves of the past and present, I stumbled across what the folks from my parts call a twofa. One game that is actually two games. You see, sitting on the shelf was an Xbox One case that held both Limbo and Inside. 2019 me remembered 2016 me's decision to choose the other game over this game, and now me, remembering all three of us wishing that we started this channel a whole lot sooner, picked up the game and went on my merry way. The secondary reason I tell you this story is to also say, don't be surprised when the next game I cover on this channel is Limbo's spiritual successor. You see, I like mystery, but I feel like some things are obvious. But we'll get into Inside when we get out of Limbo. Limbo is one of those games I had watched so many people play but had never had the pleasure of actually playing myself, which is heartbreaking in retrospect because Limbo is a puzzle game, and boy, oh boy, do I love me some puzzle games. Interestingly, though, Limbo seems to stand in a very strange place in the puzzle game pantheon, because as a puzzle game, Limbo seems to be both perfectly in place where it belongs in the genre, as well as a game that stands completely by itself in presentation, because there are many games that play like Limbo, but there is no game that feels like Limbo. Limbo is in a very interesting camp of nostalgic obscurity to me, because while its very presence is instantly recognizable, I think I can show this image to anyone who's played a video game between 2009 and 2012, and they'd immediately go, oh yeah, dude, that's Limbo. And that being said, I don't think anyone can give a very definitive answer as to what this game means, literally or figuratively. I don't think Limbo is just a game. The same way that I don't think the classic NES, Atari, or arcade cabinet games are just games. To me, Limbo is as abstract in its definition for itself as it is abstract in its presentation. While I played this game, it bled a sense of loneliness to me. This game doesn't seem to imbue a lot of philosophy, but it kept reminding me, and I'm very, very sorry in advance, of a quote by Nietzsche. Friedrich Sad Boy Wilhelm Nietzsche, in case you were confused. Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster. And if you gaze into the abyss also gazes into you. I want you to remember that insanely overused and maddeningly cliche goth teenager quote for both this game and the next game, because I think that this is where we can try to look into the core of Limbo, specifically the second half of that quote, gaze into the abyss. But I think that we have to remember that in talking about this game, we won't find answers. This game is like a Rorschach test in almost every way. In presentation, in execution, and in interpretation. It gives us no answers, but whatever we can derive from it probably tells us more about ourselves than it does about the game, and maybe it can make us more comfortable with diving into the unknown. So, with all that in our train of thought, let's dive into the darkness and get lost in Limbo. Hey there, how you doing? If you followed this channel for a while, you may have noticed a pattern, because if I try to be one thing, it is predictable. Organized. I meant organized. You see, dear viewer, I try to start the gameplay section of every video I make with my first experience with whatever game I happen to be talking about. But, as it so happens to happen, my first experience with Limbo was not memorable. Honestly, my experience was so not memorable that in trying to remember back in June of 2019, I can really only go off of what my achievement data says for that time, and according to a computer that has a way better memory than me, I played Limbo on June 26, 2019, got 2 achievements, 170 gamer score, and then went on my merry way. And this is really disheartening to me. Not the gamer score, the experience. When I booted up Limbo to complete, contemplate, and say goodbye to it in the making of this very video, I had a really memorable time. Limbo falls into the genre of game that I personally have a very large soft spot for, and that game genre is puzzle. I love me some puzzles. More so, I love me some solving of some puzzles. Here's perhaps an obvious but maybe controversial opinion for you. I believe that all games have puzzle elements in them, whether they be horror or FPS or racing or fighting or etc. or etc. I think that these puzzle elements are hidden under a veil of sorts, however, because we may think that we're trying to kill robot aliens or hit the perfect combo or escape the killer or whatever, but in doing so, the game has introduced a puzzle we have to solve. It just doesn't openly explain itself as such. Huh. Did I just say that all games are puzzle games? I think I did. My point is, the games that are open about their puzzling intentions and mechanics simply market themselves as such, titling themselves puzzle games. I don't think Limbo is really unique in the realm of puzzle games as a puzzle game, meaning I don't think that it breaks any bounds in terms of what it offers the player when compared to other puzzle games of that time or previous times, which then begs the question, why is it so memorable in the genre to me? And if you were to ask, I think it's because whatever molds it doesn't break in the puzzle department, it definitely breaks in the atmosphere department. Limbo is quiet, but not silent. When you boot up Limbo, you're greeted with no color, just black and gray. The titles, the texts, the sound, it all is subtle. If you didn't know that Limbo was a puzzle game, you'd never have known with what the visuals tell you. Honestly, you'd probably be forgiven if you thought that it was a horror game through and through. You're never asked to assume what you might be getting yourself into when playing Limbo. The game just lets you reminisce. You can hear the sounds of a forest through some ambiance and falling rain. You don't realize what you're really hearing is rain until you do what the prompt on screen tells you and press any button. And then, when you start the game, all sounds leave, except the forest. The gameplay of Limbo is very basic if you ever played a 2D side-scroller. The goal is to move forward. Granted, forward in this situation, and I think in most cases, but don't quote me on that unless I'm not wrong, means moving to the right. Sometimes you'll have to move backwards, meaning the left, but 9 times out of 10, when you are in a side-scroller, you are on a mission to get as much to the right as you possibly can, cube and shuffle, eat your heart out. Limbo is no exception. Our goal is to go that way. There will be obstacles, puzzles, and secrets along our journey that exclusively exist to stop us from doing just that, and the only thing we can do to help us navigate this world besides move forward is jump, swing, push, hang, and pull, and beyond those basic commands, we're really helpless, but not hopeless. These simple commands actually give us all that we need to solve every single puzzle in the game. We just have to utilize them wisely, because the game, in its divisiveness, doesn't tell us that we can do any of these things. We just have to experiment our way into success. And the boy we are controlling this whole endeavor through is as open to interpretation as everything else in the game. You see, the Limbo wiki calls him Nameless Boy, so let's do this kid a favor and give him a name. I'm gonna call him Limboy. Get it? Like Lim Boy? Like Limbo with a Y at the end. Limboy. His name is Limboy. Our main man, Limboy, is a creature unto himself because he has no apparent specialties to differentiate himself from the rest of the humans in the game, besides the fact that he happens to be the one we are controlling throughout the very short runtime of the game. He simply just is. Nevertheless, he is our hero throughout this harrowing journey, and his fragile little hands are the ones we use to solve all the game's puzzles. Now, in writing this section, I went back and forth in my brain about whether or not I'd tell you how to solve the game's puzzles. Because, you see, this here section is about numbers and how to bypass said numbers. And usually I'd count and calculate how many of some things you'd come across if you were to play this here game, and believe me, I did do that, and believe me, we will get into those numbers a lot sooner than later, but in pondering this conundrum, I came to two conclusions. The first is, this game is about learning how to solve things, and it felt very disingenuous of me to deny you the joy of figuring out this game's wonderful trials and tribulations for yourself if you haven't already experienced them. And the second is, I don't think Limbo's puzzles are necessarily difficult to solve, but they are very difficult to execute. Before I tell you what I mean, let me first explain something about the puzzles in question. I alluded to this question earlier, but let's actually legitimately ask ourselves, what is a puzzle? So, what is it? In terms of Limbo, I decided that a puzzle can be classified as any time something obscures the player's path when obvious means of solution to said obscurity are not present, or when the obvious means are not simple. Example, jumping over a gap is not a puzzle, but figuring out how and when to jump over a gap is. Make sense? Maybe? We're moving on. And don't worry, because I have taken it upon myself to describe the specific puzzles Limbo presents. And with all this in mind, it seems to me that Limbo has 3 subtypes of puzzles, but before I get into the descriptions of the individual subtypes of puzzles, let me first explain this! These descriptions are more so ingredients than set in stone, live or die by, all or nothing descriptions. Think of the game Limbo as a table full of food, and each item of food is a different puzzle in the game, but all these puzzles are made up of the same individual ingredients. Some are only made up of 1, some are made up of 2, and some are made up of all 3. They are very fluid in their design, especially when they involve actual fluid. Alright, so with all the caveated, here are the puzzle subtypes. We have environmental puzzles, physics puzzles, and timing puzzles. Now, you may think that because there are only 3 subtypes, that the puzzles get repetitive or dull after a while, and you'd be forgiven for believing that, but after playing the game as long and as much as I have, I'd honestly argue the contrary. Having only 3 subtypes doesn't mean that the puzzles are boring. I actually think that a very high point of the game is realizing how many different puzzles the developers were able to conjure with only 3 components. Because after you think about it, it really becomes genuinely impressive. I say this to tell you that there are 40 chapters, but, technically there's 41. Actually more technically there's 39 main chapters with puzzles, 1 chapter without any puzzles, and 1 more secret chapter chocked full of puzzles, but we'll get into the other secrets a little bit later. By my count, there are 76 puzzles in all 40 chapters. 20 of those puzzles are in the secret chapter. 22 puzzles out of the 76 are made up of 1 singular puzzle subtype. 40 are made up of 2 singular puzzle subtypes, and 14 are made up of 3, while the final 10 are literal Easter eggs scattered throughout the game, but don't be puzzled, because we'll get into those puzzles when we get past the puzzle section of this puzzle game. If you take a shot every time I say puzzle in this video, you'll be dead before the 20-minute mark. Environmental puzzles can be classified when something set in the environment must be passed, specifically when said obstacle can't be moved or forced upon by the player. Usually, these come in the form of giant, screen-swallowing things like lakes, caverns, or walls, but can also be classified by things like saw blades, electrical floors, elevators, and even an entire railway section. Now, you may be asking, wait, since every puzzle is caked into the game, can't all puzzles be classified under the environmental title? Well, no. I'm not counting puzzles that can't be manipulated by the player, but instead manipulate the player. This means that environmental puzzles are probably the simplest to surpass because they are reactionary. However, this also means that they add the most scenery-chewing elements of the game. For instance, the spider and the giant hotel sign, arguably the two most iconic staples of this game, would both be categorized under the environmental puzzle section because the player has to figure out how to move around and through them in order to get to the next section. An interesting variation on the environmental puzzle subtype are these parasitic bugs that attach themselves to the top of the player's head throughout Limbo. These bugs are, in my opinion, the most tedious part of the game because they cannot be skipped and really slow the pace. Honestly, they're my only gripe with the game, but I wouldn't even consider them a gripe because they're few and far between, and Limbo is a short experience anyway, so they only hinder you later on. And you see, as previously mentioned in moving forward, we want to go as far right of the screen as possible. And these bugs hate love and joy, so they want to take you as far left as possible. And the only way they can conclude their cantankerous crusade on our cranium is when they are consumed by carnivorous cave-sealing canines. You can combat me in the comments. Like I said, these bugs only show up a handful of times, and every time they did, I audibly sighed. I'd usually give you some advice on how to deal with them after talking about them, but really there isn't any advice I can think of besides just deal with them. Like they're never on for long, you know, and they're kind of more annoying than detrimental, but there are 67 environmental puzzles in the game. Next are physics puzzles. These are the puzzles where you have to use the game's physical engine to overcome specific obstacles. These puzzles are the times where you have to jump, throw, climb, use water, swing, gravity shift, and push your way to your conclusion. Remember like 472 words ago when I described environmental puzzles as when the game manipulates you and not vice versa? Well, get ready, bucko, cause now is your chance to manipulate. These are the puzzles that probably take the most work to understand and the ones that will most likely make you restart a checkpoint, because now the air of responsibility is strictly on you to move the box to the right place, or make sure the box is positioned correctly, or move one box at the right time to make sure the other box lands on it. There's a lot of box manipulation in Limbo. That came out weird. The physics also account for all the times you have to run, jump, or move in a section at a specific time, because Limboy moves in a very particular way. I can't get over that we're calling him Limboy. I like that. That's too good. You see, a simple jump in Limbo isn't all that it seems, because where you land depends on how fast you're moving at the time of jumping, and if you're standing still, you're gonna jump differently than if you're running. And the angle of trajectory is gonna be different in all scenarios that you take, all of which has been thought through by the game developers in the game's engine. Like I mentioned earlier, the game's physical engine is really impressive considering the fact that the small team at Playdead built and programmed it from scratch specifically for the game. And the more you notice the work that they put into it, from the way the rope swings, to the specific timing in which Limboy jumps, to the sections where gravity shifts, it starts to become very clear as to why this game was so successful. And speaking of gravity shifts, the sections in Limbo in which the game decides to defy Isaac Newton and God were definitely a notable hurdle in the way of finishing the game from a player perspective, or maybe more so a me perspective, because as the title Gravity Shift implies, Limboy moves from the ground to the ceiling, and we now, as the player, have to take into account logical motion in order to move forward. And the real challenge comes in when time is introduced, but I'll get into that in around 4 seconds. There are 37 physical puzzles in the game. Finally, we have timing puzzles. I think that these are the most self-explanatory, because these are the puzzles that require precise timing to pull off. One little slip, misstep, or poorly thought-out jump, and Limboy is limb gone. God, if anyone needs help with timing, it's It's me. The timing puzzles are a quaint little pickle because they never really feel fair, but in hindsight, always are. They require a not so small amount of muscle memory to pull off perfectly, especially when you have to pull them off over and over and over. That is, unless you just get lucky your first try. These are also interesting because, like environmental puzzles, timing puzzles are ingrained in the scenery, but with a neat little twist. There are so many instances in Limbo when you have to time a moment with a machine-like component in your way so perfectly. These could range from mounted turrets that have a slight delay after stepping in front of them, or giant buttons that always activate something you don't want them to, or many seemingly simple control panels that are never, ever simple. Timing puzzles are finicky because in your first playthrough, you are almost always guaranteed to die in a horrible death because you haven't figured out the timing yet. Meaning that these are the learning puzzles, the ones that force you to practice patience while thinking on your toes. Let me give you an example, and before you ask, yes, I am about to help you solve a puzzle. One puzzle out of 76 puzzles. I know what I said.
Don't be mad at me for helping you. I literally explained every Chris section in detail in Outlast. Don't at me, Samantha.
You're welcome. I love you. The third time you encounter the head bugs, on the wiki they're called brain parasites, but I'm gonna call them head bugs. The third time you encounter head bugs, you're forced to walk past this area with a box, an elevator, and a bunch of pipes. This is also just one of many examples in which Limbo uses a very clever foreshadowing to show you what you're about to deal with, but after you maneuver forward, you reach a button you're forced to step on. This button lowers a second box being held by mechanical arms close to the ceiling, but also activates a saw blade that is inching its way towards you. Now, remember, you still have an unwanted hitchhiker superglued to your forehead, and you can't move backwards or stop moving in the direction chosen, and the box is gonna fall, and the saw is gonna move at the same speed 100% of the time. So what do? Well, you, perhaps like me, can slowly start to realize that the only variable in this puzzle that can change is you. And you realize, while you can't stop moving or move backward, you can try to move in the opposite direction and slow your speed down long enough to let the box fall in front of you, climb on top of it, and jump over the saw blade, after which you'll let the cave puppies eat the hitchhiker. But wait! You're not done, because now you have to get past the saw blade again, this time without the box to aid in your troubles because it has just been eviscerated. Like you will probably soon be. You learn fairly quickly that while the saw blade is slow, it is also very huge, and you can't just jump over it casually, but to your advantage, you realize that you are on a slightly higher than ground level ledge, so you can try over and over again to jump when the saw blade meets the corner of said ledge, but this never seems to work. Maybe you get stuck there. Maybe you get frustrated. Maybe you start crying and leave your mom an embarrassingly long voicemail apologizing for not calling her more often. I don't know. It's your life. This persists until you get the timing of the saw blade down long enough to know that if you jump just as the blade is approaching the ledge, you will always clear it with a running start, and then you nail this every subsequent run because you failed so frequently and so often, and then your mom calls you back and tells you that she understands because you're an adult now and you're doing adult things and everyone has to grow up sometime. I'm sorry, what were we talking about? This is just one simple instance of the way timing works in Limbo. Timing puzzles also might be the most tedious, hence why they're the fewest number of them. There are only 19 timing puzzles in the game. And this is what I mean when I say that these puzzles are not difficult to solve, but difficult to execute. Any person at any age can understand the obstacle in Limbo, and any person at any age can work long enough to get past them. Limbo is a puzzle game about endurance, not wit. Now, let me step in and sort of kind of introduce contrary to literally what I just said. Remember how I mentioned that there are secret Easter eggs hidden in the game? Let's talk about them. In Limbo, we find 10 literal Easter eggs hidden extra hard throughout the chapters. Now, the jury's still out on whether or not these specific eggs are Easter eggs, but I think we can all agree that they are eggs. These eggs all have their own achievements attached to them. But the neat thing about these specific eggs is that they aren't just secret scenery chewing candy style eggs. In chapter 26, if we go down the ladder and under the ledge that we were just on, we'll also get an achievement for just coming down here. Also, welcome, we've entered the achievement section of the video. We'll eventually see a clearing with 10 candles, some lit, some not. And the flowers in this clearing represent the eggs that we're looking for. Once we find all of them, the wall that was previously blocking our passage disappears and we're able to move forward. This then introduces us to Limbo's 41st secret level. Now, be warned, Limbo's secret level holds the hardest puzzles the game has to offer. But again, they aren't hard because of how much you have to think about them while solving. They're hard because they're all in the dark. This level forces you to get creative in how you figure out the solutions to move forward. Sparks, sound, timing, anything and everything to just get to the end and bag the secret achievement. And believe me, you will need a keen eye and ear to actually understand anything that is happening in this level. I recommend using headphones. Maybe I make it sound more difficult than it really is. Honestly, I think the secret level was actually a really fun time. For me, at least, it was a very clever and welcome change of pace from the other puzzles of the game, especially late into completing all this game has to offer. But it's not any more difficult than probably the end game puzzles with the gravity shifts, but if you want to talk about difficult, oh boy, let's start talking about difficult. Limbo has a permadeath mode. Sort of. See, Limbo has an achievement called No Point in Dying, which asks the player to beat the game in one sitting with 5 or less deaths. As soon as I saw this, I thought, oh god, I'm cursed. Listen, I think I'm just gonna have to accept the reality that sometimes some games just want to watch this video boy burn. And if you want to achieve this achievement, then that means going back to the tried and true method of playing the game over and over and over again. And this, of course, also means that you just have to get used to failing over and over and over again. The very kind saving grace that the developers have gifted us, however, besides Dino Patty's face, is the fact that you have 5 deaths instead of just 1, meaning that if you slip up early, you can breathe a little bit easier. So that really doesn't make it a perma-death mode, more like a quinta-death mode. Anyway, when realizing that I'd have to put my speedrunner shoes on again and study the ins and outs of Limbo so that I can look cool on the internet, I sat down and found a guide to help me out, because of course I did. This time I used Halo Pup Sharp's helpful No Point in Dying guide. Thank you, sir. I don't think Halo Pup Sharp upload videos anymore, but they seem like cool dudes, so I hope they're doing okay. Back to Limbo! Here's the thing, audience. You lovely, beautiful lot. My previous experience with one-run playthroughs has not, to put it lightly, been pretty. Both Outlast took many months out of my work schedule and many years off of my life. Some of my more presumptive viewers can probably deduce that Limbo's equivalent mode wasn't so traumatizing to me because I didn't dedicate an entire section of this video towards it. And while that is true, that doesn't mean it was a cakewalk either, for many, many reasons. I mean, consider this next section like a mini chapter onto the gameplay section, probably why the gameplay section is extra long for this video, but it's not important enough to actually, dedicate its own chapter to, so consider this what you will. Funny enough, as I tried to complete, contemplate, and conceptualize this very video you are watching, I was in the process of moving again. It wasn't as big of a move as I described in Outlast 2, but you see, I'm just now getting out of the habit of moving every time my lease is up, but at this point in this story, I was still very much in that habit. So as I tried to get No Point in Dying, it started to take me days to try. And as each day and every attempt slipped past, more and more of my stuff had to be put into boxes. But counterproductively, I kept failing more and more. And through irony and hubris, when trying to get No Point in Dying, you go against what the achievement implies and die a lot. It is a shameful, shameful death, because it's not an explosive affair like it was in Outlast, where once you die, you're thrown back to the title screen. No. It is a death by 1,000 cuts. Or, again, 5 cuts, rather, but I'm trying to make it more, dramatic. Stop looking at me, Samantha! The reason for the shame is that when you're trying to achieve no point in dying, every time you do die, you are incentivized to keep a tally for each death, and when that tally reaches 5, boom, you have to restart yourself, which is just a little bit extra cruel. So, I sat down, feeling confident and cocky, thinking that it would be a breeze to finish this game and get on with this video, but as I kept dying, the window of opportunity kept closing. Because if I can't get this achievement before my lease is up, then that means that this video will have to be delayed, because I'll have to pack up all my stuff and then unpack it when I get to my new place, and that'll be very, very annoying. Because, dude, I got patrons now, meaning that, like, this whole thing is, like, serious. So as I kept trying, I would get closer and closer to the ending each time. I was learning how to get better as each subsequent runs passed, but the question that haunted my brain was, would I get good enough before my inevitable departure? Well, as my runs inched into the double digits, and as I started to slip up more and more, to be honest, it was this frickin' jump right here. Dude, I couldn't stand how many deaths this small gap stole from me.
Look at it! This is what bested me!
Cut to the day that my lease is up, and I'm supposed to leave my apartment. I have everything packed except my TV and my Xbox One S. I have failed 15 times up to this point, and run 16 is my crowning achievement so far. I had made it all the way to the second hotel sign with only 1 death. I accidentally slipped on the broken box in the first water section, but I had 4 tries left, and I knew this section. I knew the end of this game like the back of my... Okay. Okay, maybe that was a fluke. Let's just try one more. Okay, strange. I still got 2 more. Okay, I got 1 more. Let me just... Audience, I was tired. But I knew I had 1 run left in me. And this run 17, was gonna be it. Run 17 wasn't looking good. I started out with a really lame preventable death from the spider, and then I died trying to swing over the first electrical floor, and then I died again 2 minutes later trying to swing over the second electrical floor. Run 17 wasn't looking good. 3 deaths and only halfway through. Oh my god. Okay, but to my own surprise, I got past the second hotel sign with ease and made it to the final 3 gravity shifts. I skate by gravity shift 1. I barely make it past gravity shift 2, and I finally get to the last gravity shift. The final obstacle in Limbo. And arguably the hardest puzzle in the entire game. You see, not only does this puzzle incorporate all 3 puzzle subtypes, but you as the player have to deal with 2 gravity shifts, 1 vertical, 1 horizontal, 1 time delay, and an electrical floor on top, and a spinning saw to your side. And you have to hit the switch to the horizontal gravity shift in mid-air. This puzzle is not a cakewalk, hence why it's the last puzzle in the game. And the only way to pull it off is nothing but exact, precise timing. I had 2 deaths left, so I have 1 death left, and I know I have to nail this, but I panic, and now I have no deaths left. Listen, I'm done, man. I've barely landed this last jump with infinite tries, and as my little child body parts fly through the saw, I realize that this run may be just like all the others. And again, I'm gonna have to put this channel on hold to attend to my life, and then I'm just gonna have to be disappointed and feel like I'm disappointing you, the audience. And I said, screw it. Sometimes you just gotta accept. Wait, what? Wait. Hold on. What? I did it. I got the achievement. No point in dying. No point in giving up. Maybe I'm just lucky. I'd certainly like to think so. Much like the rest of the gameplay, No Point in Dying is about moving forward despite the obstacles in your way. It's about finding solutions and getting somewhere. The same thing, however, cannot be said for this game's story. Well, that sure got sappy quick. I usually like to wait until, the end of these videos before I dive into whatever feelings my feels decide to feel, but since I have something else planned for later, I guess we just had to rip that emotional band-aid off early, so... Hello, everybody. Welcome to the story, and what a doozy of a story it is. This is actually going to be a very interesting deviation from the way things usually happen in this section, because I don't even know where to start to begin to start to talk about Limbo's story. Not that it's complex or has any layers or subplots or anything like that, but Limbo's story just sort of isn't. Like, Limbo's story is closer related to that of old arcade machines, and perhaps far more abstract than any of us single-player gamers are used to nowadays. Meaning that the story is simplistic, minimalist, even. There isn't a single line of dialogue or a single voice spoken in the entire game. I could be mistaken, but I believe that the only actual text we see on screen during the entire runtime of Limbo is just the word hotel. And the closest thing we get to anything resembling a plot is what the game tells us on its Steam page, which is, and I quote, "Uncertain of his sister's fate, a boy enters Limbo." Also, watch enough Limbo-related videos and that 9-word sentence starts to eat away at your brain. And beyond that, there really isn't anything else we can discern from this description. Here, I'm gonna see if I can explain the entire story of Limbo as it plays out in the game in 5 sentences or less, no point in lying. And you know what? Because this feels thematically appropriate, and I want to see if I can, let's turn this explanation into a gothic-esque poem to pumpkin spice this story up. Okay, don't make fun of me. This is serious, okay? I'm not joking. I used to, write poetry, competitively, for realsies. I was okay. It's a whole thing and a whole other story for a whole other therapy session. But here we go. Gothic Limbo story poem. Lights up on a child in the woods. Awoken and confused, he wanders forth. In the mist of his newfound setting, this boy has one goal he's working toward. Many dangers and queries test this child's mind. Between monsters, men, and machines, this world has been left behind. On this day, in this realm we've traveled on, we finally meet our goal and bind our tested bond. Maybe I get carried away with myself sometimes, but I kinda love it when I do. Anyway, in a lot simpler terms, things just happen. And Limboy, or the player rather, just moves through the game with no effect or stipulation to the plot because, well, beyond that sentence on the Steam page, there just isn't one. And this has led many players to speculate and theorize as to what the story means. There's literally an entire page on the wiki dedicated to the most popular fan theories. So I decided that let's actually go down the Limbo rabbit hole, or iceberg. Let me bring up a diagram. There we go. Okay, we're gonna go through all the theories, and what better way to enjoy some theories and ideas than an iceberg. And also, full disclosure, I don't really know how you're supposed to structure an iceberg analysis. I just want to talk about some of my favorite Limbo theories that I found. So, without further ado, the Limbo story theory iceberg. I really should come up with a better name. That's kind of a mouthful. Also, change the scenery. What do you think? Thank you. Let's bring back that good old iceberg. How are you, babe? How you doing? So here's how I think I'm gonna do this little experimental shindig we found ourselves in. I'm just gonna give a brief summarizing overview of some more popular theories on this game that I found, then share my thoughts with them, and then after we've all made our peace with the speculation situation, I can get into what I think the story really means. Sound good? Well, this isn't stable, because I'm not hearing any nays. Thank you. No, nope, I'm not leaving. I'm staying right here. So let's lay down some ground rules for this section. Because while I was reading these theories, I had to remove some from my talking points because a lot of them dive more into the symbolism of Limbo and not the story of Limbo. And believe me, we will talk about the symbolism of Limbo when we talk about the themes of Limbo. And if you wait about 2,419 words, then we're gonna talk about it. So I'm gonna rank the theories from what I found to be most popular to the most obscure. I also kind of sort of Frankensteined some theories together because I felt like they essentially said the same thing. I say this to tell you that I'm gonna definitely miss some theories, and I know that I'm not gonna be able to cover all of them. And if I didn't mention your favorite, just remember that the sun is gonna explode one day, and that we'll all be supernovaed into oblivion. Anyway, let's get crack-a-lackin'. First up, the death and coma theory. Let's get the most bare bones theory out of the way first. The death and coma theory is really more of a building block theory rather than an actual detailed theoretical idea. The main crust of the theory being that Limboy is dead and or in a coma, and we're living out this time in between life and death, hence the name of the game, Limbo. I wanted to get this out of the way now so that when I say later on in other theories that he's dead or dies, then they won't be able to be classified into this theory, because if I did, then there'd only be like 3 theories in total, and that doesn't really seem like any fun to talk about for anyone. So let's move this aside and move on with the iceberg. The car crash theory. This is the theory that I've read the most about by far. This theory usually varies in complexity and detail, so I'm going to try and amalgamate all the different versions of this theory into one so that it can be as coherent as possible. This theory is also very metaphorical, and by that I mean that it sees the events in the game as metaphorical instances of literal happenings or goings-on rather than literal happenings or goings-on. Meaning that everything that happens is just basically from the view and idealization from this child. The theory pretty much states that a boy and his family go on vacation, or they move to a new place. It varies. The family consists of 2 parents, a brother, and a sister. And while they are vacationing / settling into moving, the boy and his sister visit a nearby forest where, for whatever reason, the sister gets sick or hurt and the family has to rush her to the hospital, but in the midst of doing that, their car crashes and the boy flies through the windshield and dies. Meaning that the end of the game is the boy meeting his sister in death as they finally reunite in the afterlife. Some aspects of the different versions of this theory argue with themselves. For example, the difference in opinion on whether they moved to a new place or whether they're just vacationing. The people who believe they are moving is based on the boxes scattered around the game, but the people who believe it's vacationing is because of the giant hotel sign. Either way, they all agree, for the most part, that the gravity shift section near the end indicates the car flipping and crashing, giving the sense of a loss of gravity. And when Limboy crashes through what seems like a pane of glass and land on the other side, that was him flying through the windshield and dying. Heavy stuff, man, but this is Limbo. The inside theory. Okay, listen, I don't usually like choosing favorites, but I genuinely think that this is my favorite of the theories. Because this one is the one that made me literally go, ooh, while I was reading it. However, this theory will also have me discussing the other game Playdead made and developed called Inside. I won't be going too in-depth with that game when describing this theory, because you better bet your bottom dollar that I'm going to be covering Inside a lot sooner than you may think, so don't worry if I don't mention it here. That being said, I still need to give a brief description to, make this theory make sense. So Inside is a puzzle platformer that was created by Playdead, and in it you play as an unnamed boy breaking into a strange facility that holds strange experiments. This theory basically proposes that the two games, Limbo and Inside, are not only in the same universe, but are taking place in the same building. The idea is that Limbo is an experiment that is being held in one of the many testing areas shown throughout Inside, and that Limboy is just another test subject that is being held against his will in this facility. One of the main points that supports this theory is that the lights we see in Limbo look like the fluorescent lights shining through the glass in Inside, and all the other children in Limbo are other test subjects. The theory also notes that all the situations to all the puzzles are so conveniently placed that it feels too convenient to be coincidental. The theory also holds the idea that the head bugs behave quite similarly to the mind control helmets that are used very frequently in Inside, hypothesizing that the head bugs are actually a prototype version of the technology used on the children. I really love this theory because it really does make a dark amount of sense when you think about it, and it changes the entire perspective of the game. It also gives the game's title an entirely new twist, because now this world isn't so mysterious and it becomes a whole lot darker when you believe that Limboy isn't the first and won't be the last of this experiment, and maybe the sister that we're trying to find or trying to locate in this strange land is just a programmed excuse to go through this puzzle over and over and over again. It's spectacular. Dante's Inferno theory. This theory holds the belief that Limbo is a retelling of Dante Alighieri's epic poem, Dante's Inferno, with many eerie similarities between the two works. Both start in a dark wood, both encounter beasts and savages, both move through different parts of the world to get to a city to find a girl. The really interesting thing about this theory to me is the fact that the theory proposes the idea that Virgil, Dante's guide and main squeeze homeboy, Dirgil for life, is represented by this white butterfly that appears throughout the game. The reason I think that this is so fascinating is that this is the only theory I've read that ever mentions this butterfly, and to be really honest, I didn't even think about it while playing, and I kind of didn't even notice it. But I absolutely love this incorporation. And if this butterfly is guiding our way through this hellish landscape, then maybe Limboy isn't as free-willed as we assumed him to be in the first place. Also, this whole theory is kind of spearheaded by this amazing blog post by Althea's Herald? Althea's Herald. Alethea's Herald. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And this blog post is extremely well written and goes into a lot greater detail than I will here, and I think that you should check it out if you are at all interested in what this theory believes. The treehouse theory. This theory holds the very fun to think about and not at all horrifying belief that both Limboy and his sister died after their treehouse collapsed on top of them. The grounds holding this theory up is that in the title screen, after you finish the game, there are two swarms of flies under the now destroyed treehouse, signifying where the boy and his sister died. The theory stating that the boy entered Limbo to help escort his sister's soul to the afterlife, and an interesting subsect of this theory is the sister theory. The sister theory hypothesizes that the world of Limbo is made up of fears, and we have to face those fears to get to the afterlife. But we are not traveling through a world made up of our fears. We are traveling through a world made up of our sister's fears. It's like we're traveling through her eternal pain and woes to reach her, to help her get to the afterlife. Very, very neat. Very backwards way of thinking about it, and I enjoy it. I enjoy that a lot. Murderer theory. This theory did make me raise my eyebrows a little bit, like, This is the theory that Limbo was actually killed by his sister, and he is traveling back from the afterlife to exact his revenge on her, and that him crashing through the glass is him breaking the barrier between worlds. And when he sees his sister, she's shocked because her zombie/ghost brother has risen from the dead to get his revenge on her. Maybe it's because I'm so dramatic, or maybe it's because I like things that are a little bit ridiculous, or maybe it's even because it's just so freaking metal, but I quite like this theory a lot. The sad reality of this theory is that I don't think it holds a lot of water when compared to the other theories, because if you remember the one sentence that describes this game's plot, it states, and I quote, "uncertain of his sister's fate," which, to me at least, implies that the boy is concerned for his sister. But I also could be wrong. You know, who knows? Who knows? I don't. Old boy theory. Okay, I saved the best for last because this theory makes absolutely no sense and I love it all the more for it. The theory is that this game starts off where the 2003 Korean action mystery thriller masterpiece Old Boy leaves off, because that movie ends in a forest of mystery and this game begins in a forest of mystery. Listen. This theory holds no water whatsoever. It holds less water than Limbo can hold in his little baby lungs, okay? But I absolutely love and adore and cherish the 2003 Korean action mystery thriller radtastic extravaganza that is Old Boy, and whatever excuse I have to talk about it, I will take that excuse. And I may or may not go deeper into my thoughts on that very specific, bloody, bombastic, Mr. Fantastic movie, and the very specific feelings that that movie gives me at a later time. But in accordance to Limbo, I guess I just don't see at all where it makes sense. And whoever wrote this theory, listen, man, you get a gold star. Whoever you are, wherever you are, boom, it's right there. Yours for the taking. This theory is also the first theory that pops up when you click on the story theory section on the fandom wiki for Limbo. I just thought that worth mentioning. Anyway. So, that concludes our Limbo story theory iceberg, name patent pending. If you liked it, then cool. If you didn't, then cool. So I wanted to go over all the story theories to make 2 points. The first is that this game's plot, or any plot for that matter, can be simplistic and poignant while still being enjoyable. The plot is simply just the vehicle that moves us from one moment to the next, and Alan Moore, or as I like to call him, the godfather of beards and comic books, said something very similar in regards to plot in a little thing he did that was kind of like a masterclass.
Plot is not the story. The plot is not the structure. It's just the plot.
Do you remember like those trailers that were all over YouTube like 6 or 7 years ago? Like there was Masterclass, and then they kind of made a bunch of like different ones, and then there was even like fake ads that tried to market themselves like Masterclass, but they were really just like scams. They all had the same idea. I tried it, and by tried it I mean I bummed off my brother's account. I didn't really like it. I kind of feel weird with artistic learning in general. I mean, I understand learning different techniques and ways to do different things in your chosen art field, but I always get strange feelings when people start to try and teach style and whatnot. Like, you know, what does or doesn't make good or bad. Heavy quotes on both of those words, by the way. Material, what are we talking about? My second point is to say that this game seems to be seen differently in the eyes of everyone who plays it. It's like an inkblot test, a Rorschach test, for all the people listening and vexing who have never heard of or known what the official name of these are before. A Rorschach test is a test that was created by Herman Rorschach back in the 1920s to evaluate what people see in the random shapes of ink blots on cards. Thank you, Wikipedia. Limbo seems to fit the mold of a modern Rorschach test quite perfectly, both in practice and appearance. This game walks a paper-thin rope between grounded ideas of fear and understanding, while also holding on to this feeling of mystery. It doesn't make you think until you think about it, and I love that. From reading all these theories, it seems to me that Limbo has a stark impact on all these people because this game was an experience for them, and evidently a memorable one. To me, Limbo's story doesn't seem to have any definitive answers onto it, even though the development team has stated that there is an actual meaning to everything and that people have gotten really close to theorizing about it, but honestly, I don't think that has to mean anything. Limbo is this black and white collage that pulls different feelings from different people. You play it, solve puzzles, and get roped into this dark adventure filled with memorable moments, and then all of a sudden, it's over, just as soon as it starts. To me, the story of Limbo means experiencing and going through this wild journey that starts to lose any sensical meaning but starts to gain emotional relevance to the player. And when we explode through the glass, we conclude this crazy journey with this high point of adrenaline, but ultimately end up right where we started. And with all that being said, for anyone who really wants to know what theory I think is the most accurate, it's obviously the old boy theory. The themes. Every time we get to the theme section, I feel like it's my birthday, and all the people who didn't really want to stay at the party because they had, like, work in the morning or something, they all leave, and then all the people who really want to sit around and talk about some things remain. With the story and all of its icebergness out of the way, you may be asking, how are we going to even begin to dive into the themes of a game that has such an open-ended story? Well, my quaint, questioning companion, keep up those thoughts and you're gonna get yourself an endearing pat on the head. I'd actually argue that the themes Limbo presents are shockingly crystal clear compared to the story. Remember when I said we'd talk about the symbolic ideas when we talk about the themes, and how said basic ideas have no interest when discussed in the story section about 2,419 words ago? Well, we're here! It's funny, I find that when talking about the themes, I can feel them better than I can articulate them. This is probably because of the game's short runtime, or the stranglehold on atmosphere Limbo takes so much pride in. It leaves very little said, but what is said has this unending echo in my brain. You see, when you play video games on a mission to say goodbye to them, you have to play them over and over and over again, and when you play them over and over and over again, you, perhaps like me, start to see a new perspective of sorts. You start to assume what the game might be trying to tell you, or even further, you start to see yourself in the game. I mean, like, metaphorically. With all my attempts to find philosophy in this game, my mind kept wandering to one man, and I am so sorry for this in advance. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. Oh, Freddy. Oh, Freddy, what can I say about you that definitely hasn't already been said in a video essay before? Because if there's anything people who write a lot for a living love, it's how much you don't. Well, to be frank with our boy Fred here, I'm not really here to talk about him, more so an idea he presented in his book Beyond Good and Evil. And, okay, alright, look. I can't believe I'm saying this. I don't want to sound smart in these videos. Obviously, I try to compose myself in such a way that I can be understood easily, while also speaking and saying words that I like to say. However, it definitely seems that Freddy Neatwitch here is so often associated with characters, not just in media, who so very much so want to seem smart. And I mean, it's literally like a meme. Like, every time I hear Fred Boy Nikki Sweets mentioned by anyone in the outside wilds of the real world, I can't help but just picture Paul Dano in Little Miss Sunshine. I also relate to that image, because believe you me, I definitely have a Paul Dano from Little Miss Sunshine living inside my brain all the time. Also, you should watch Little Miss Sunshine. It's a fun, it's a movie. The movie out of 10 movie. Watch the movie. Which, by the way, the Little Miss Sunshine is almost 20 years old, and that hurts my loins to say that to a microphone, and it hurts even more to edit, and I can only imagine how much it hurts to watch, but... What are we talking about? In Beyond Good and Evil, a book written with the goal of breaking down the human perception of, well, good and evil, Fredman Neat Sweats presents this quote in Chapter 4. Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster. And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you. Now, I'm going to get much into this quote later, but let me give a brief notion as to why I think this quote, specifically the last 12 words of it, matter to this game so much. All the themes in Limbo seem to center around one idea. Call it the body that all these spider legs are attached to. And this idea holds our hand throughout Limbo. It carries us through the story, sometimes lightly and sometimes by our necks. That idea is loneliness. Limbo is an isolating game with a very daunting, crushing goal we have to tackle alone. We start the game alone, and we only have ourselves to rely on when solving all the puzzles. And depending on your outlook of the story, we even end the game alone. But even if you interpret the ending to the story as a celebration in reuniting with your lost sibling, ending your loneliness, can we ignore 99% of an idea because we completed our task? To be honest, I don't know. And genuinely, I think that much like the questions raised in Beyond Good and Evil, this isn't a question to take lightly, and definitely not one easily answered. Limbo's themes all orbit around loneliness, and they seem to persist through the story, as if the deeper and deeper we go, the darker and darker things get, and the less and less things make sense. Just like an abyss. Are you seeing my point yet? You see what I'm trying to... I'm trying to be philosophically poignant. Philosophically poignant, Samantha. The themes in Limbo are the abyss that Freddy Knick-Knack warns us about. When we stare into the darkness that Limbo shows us, we start to see that darkness holds something in it. And maybe that something stares through us. And maybe we get too scared to look away. And the first theme I want to talk about is... I've talked about light before, and I've talked about how whenever I think about times that inspire me or times that bring me immense joy, I compare them to light shining through a window. But this game has a beautiful relationship with light. In Limbo, light seems to be incorporated in some incredible ways. We wake up in a beam of light on the forest floor. We use light as a guiding point for a lot of the puzzles. And light is the only thing that changes the direction of the head bugs. Light seems to be our guide and our tool when navigating Limbo's philosophical minefield. While I was researching this essay, I watched many videos on the theories of Limbo's story, and I heard one fellow talk about the moment when you ambush the giant fly and it lifts you up to a ledge, and how he assumed that the bug would be taking us to the light above, but instead dropping us and losing a limb. The way he described it, it was almost like the light is where we want to go, but we end up going into the darkness instead. This moment surprised me because I had never even considered that that could have been a destination. But now every time I see that little cutscene, it's all I can think about. It really looks like the bug is trying to take us to the light. The speaker of the video theorized that the light seems like an escape from the horrors of the place we found ourselves in. I find it hard to agree with this theorist, mostly because our goal isn't to escape, it's to find our sister. But despite that, I think that he raises an interesting question. If the light representing escape doesn't feel right, what does the light represent? Because it feels too important to the overall themes to just write off. I think that when asking this question, we have to do some digging. And I think that we can crack this egg by digging up some secrets. As mentioned an eternity ago in the gameplay section of this video, we have to find glowing eggs in order to find a corridor that holds glowing flowers, so we can play the hardest section of the game in darkness. And it's this darkness section that I want to be focusing on when covering this theme, because I think it says so much while saying so little. You see, Limbo doesn't have any DLC or extra content. It is simply just all in one package. So this secret section is meant for all the people who want to get all they can from this small little puzzle platformer. And this super secret level's main gimmick is that it takes away the one thing the player had continuously counted on throughout the main playthrough of the game: light. This secret section makes us rely on sound and slight visual hints to get a semi-decent grasp on what we're trying to do. But I think that besides being beyond clever, this level hints at that ever-present question: what does the light mean? I think it means this: when it comes to light, we only know what we see. If this game encapsulates looking into ourselves, then it is only right that we use the metaphor of light to represent what is in front of us. But what this secret section shows us is that our problems are there regardless of if we can see them or not. Light is our navigator in Limbo. I think this is the reason that we walk into it when we are finally reunited with our sister. But despite this uplifting idea, light isn't our savior. Light is only the conduit we use to see our problems, not to avoid them or solve them. We can probably condense this idea down into this: if a child is afraid of the dark because he thinks monsters are lurking, turning on the lights will only show him where the monsters are. And that brings me to my next theme. Let's bring up a question I alluded to earlier, but never actually got into. Is Limbo a horror game? Everywhere I look, I see it described as a puzzle game, which I believe we've heavily established that it is. But as I mentioned earlier, if you just started the game of Limbo with no prior knowledge, you'd definitely be forgiven if you thought that it was a horror game. But does that forgiveness exactly do Limbo justice? Because there are scares and thrills in Limbo aplenty. There's moments of suspense and heavy violence. There are even games that are described as Limbo-like, and most of the games are definitely horror games. I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring here anyway and say that Limbo isn't a horror game. Even if it isn't a horror game, I still think Limbo does deal in fear, and it wants to explore what scares us. It's a slight distinction, but I think it's also an important one. A recurring theme and detail that I read about over and over and over again when researching the story themes of Limbo is that all of the enemies, and by that I mean most of the enemies, seem to represent childhood fears. Spiders, the dark, other children, water, gravity, giant oppressive factories, mind-controlling brain bugs. Okay, again, some of them don't exactly stack very well with this analogy, but I digress. I say childhood fears, and I'm sure many adults are scared of those things too, but I'm just trying to set up thematic foreshadowing, so just let me foreshadow. This is an intriguing point to me because if we were to step into the glowing white eyes of Limboy, everything would seem horrifying. And not only would it seem horrifying, but when we fail a puzzle or fall victim to any one of said enemies, we see Limboy die, and it is a dramatic display of blood and dismemberment. When playing Limbo, we are lost in this world we have never seen before, and this world presents us with challenges that are terrifying. One could interpret the game as just a child going through everyday life, but from their terrified perspective. I mean, when you think about the world through the eyes of a child, everything seems huge and deadly. Have you ever gone back to your elementary school after like a couple of years and notice that the halls and ceilings are way smaller than you remember them being? I think that Limbo wants us to see the world before we had forgotten how scary everything seemed. Like, the game is reminding us what it felt like to be a scared child. It definitely reminded me. How old do you think Limboy looks? 10? 11? Just for simplicity's sake, let's say he's 10. When I was 10 years old, coincidentally around when this game came out, I remember being horrified of the world. I was scared of literally everything outside my front door, and I would regularly cry during thunderstorms because the loud noises and the rain would terrify me. I hated the dark because everything I knew was suddenly gone. Bugs and insects were scary little alien monsters that would shock me beyond belief to the point of anxiety attacks. I have so many memories of adults trying to explain to me that all my fears are meaningless, and everything will be okay, and that what I was afraid of was nothing to be afraid of, but I would never listen. For an embarrassingly long time, I was afraid of all these things that showed no real threat to me, and in a very strange way, Limbo reintroduced what that felt like. It's silly to look back, and it's easy to laugh or feel shame for how I felt as a child, but to look at things again from that point of view is a strangely refreshing perspective. Like, it all suddenly makes sense again. Not the fear itself, you understand, the logic behind the fear. Maybe the things we're afraid of are legitimate. I mean, there are definitely the giant monster spider equivalents out there in the world. I mean, there are also literally just giant monster spiders out in the world. Some of them freaking eat birds, dude. But my point is, maybe Limbo is a farce on fear. And maybe the things that made us feel lonely in our terror were and are just in our imagination. And they're a lot smaller in reality than they seem in our head. And listen, I'm a lot older now. I can see that all the things that kept me up at night as a child seem ridiculous. But in playing Limbo, I could feel that fear again. If I were to compact all those thematic stories into one idea, it'd be that our childhood wasn't how we remembered it, and that we can only really remember the fears by how we interpreted them. But to actually see how much we've changed from ourselves into adulthood, we have to see where we originally came from. It's impossible to notice the changes you've made on yourself until you look at what you were, which brings me to the last theme. Okay, pre-warning, this section has already gotten really dense, but this section is going to get particularly dense, and I'm gonna try my best to even sound a little bit coherent, but here we go. Where can we start when we talk about the ever-present theme of transition in the game Limbo? Well, let's start with the word limbo itself. Limbo has two meanings in the dictionary. One being a purgatory, or a space in between heaven and hell, and the second being a transitional waiting period, as if stuck between two decisions or states of being. I believe that Limbo is a transitional game. Limbo is a game about solving puzzles and overcoming obstacles, and much like times in our life that are trivial and painful, we have to learn how to transition between them. I think more in feeling than in practice, Limbo exemplifies this idea. Places in Limbo shift in between each other so fluidly that we probably don't even realize we're in a separate area until we're already halfway through it. When we reach an area that is troublesome, we have to adjust and think differently on how to solve the problem. And when we reach the end, we question if it even is the end. Because after everything that has happened, how can we come to any conclusion? You see, there's this Japanese philosophical concept called ma. Ma is the idea that there needs to be a pause in time in order for something to flourish. The idea that negative space and slowing down are not only helpful for an individual to grow and excel, but impossible without it. Ma is the idea that transitional moments in time are not negative. Limbo is... Sorry, when I think about Ma, and I think about transitions, I get, this has been a strange year for me. I've lost people who were close to me this year, both physically and emotionally. I reached a goal that I previously thought was so far out of reach, and now I'm feeling the weight of this commitment and incoming goals. And that is equally as exhilarating as it is terrifying. And right now, I find myself writing this script in a moment of transition, a time in between notable times. And so often, I find myself waiting, or rather wasting time in between those moments. This is the abyss. The abyss is the parts of ourselves that we can so easily get lost in. The parts of ourselves that we find ourselves in between two versions of who we are and who we're going to be. And in that transition, we can so easily lose what we want in something that ultimately will hurt us. In Limbo, we search and solve and fail our way to a fantastic victory through a world that is entirely mysterious to us. In our real life, we have places in our brain where we don't want to go because they hurt or scare or challenge us. They are the dark places filled with unknown puzzles and harsh realities on who we are and who we are not. This is when the abyss stares back at us. In Limbo, we find that the puzzles are just obstacles that ultimately take us back to where we started. But that doesn't mean we have to start from the beginning. I realized, after many years, what our sad, somber philosopher, Frederick Nietzsche McQueen, won't tell you, that I will, is that after the abyss in your mind stares back at you, you will always learn something important, and you can use that to better yourself. Just like a puzzle that is begging to be solved, you are not your darkness. You're just transitioning out of it. Okay, like I said, I'm trying my best not to make this section completely incoherent, and I'm trying to make it make sense. And really the only excuse I can come up with is that philosophy is complicated and maybe I'm just not great at describing it. But Limbo is strange. Limbo is a strange but rewarding venture. And I think that Freddie Nietzsche Peachy would agree that even the hardest puzzles have solutions. And maybe that's not a thing that should discourage us from trying to solve them. Was this entire section an excuse to talk about some stuff that has, been on my mind? Well, spoiler alert, audience, this whole channel is just an excuse to talk about the things that have been on my mind, Samantha, and I don't really appreciate you accurately judging me for it. So, maybe chill, Sam. How about you take a sweet chill pill? I think that with that, it's time that we say goodbye. Dear Limbo, you emo dark weirdo, you. I think it's obvious to say, but still worth saying, I'm proud of you. Look at all the amazing things that you've done with what you were given. You created a small, dense pocket of something unique and you shared it with the world. You raised questions and offered puzzles and hid secrets, and now we all have something to talk about and reminisce over. Believe me, you're definitely a short experience, but that doesn't mean you aren't meaningful. You invite everyone who plays you to not only question you, but also get as much out of you as possible. And honestly, I think that's really commendable. I think I want to adopt some of that. Limbo, your beauty is undeniable, and your imagery is going to stay with me for a long time, I promise. Saying goodbye to you, I now know, also means saying goodbye to a part of myself that hurts me to remember. But I think that remembering that part is important. And Limbo, I thank you for showing me that. I hope that if anyone takes something away from their experience with you, it's that there can be growth from challenge. In fact, I'd argue that it's inevitable. You're a confusing one, Limbo, but I won't hold it against you. You've shown me that not everyone is going to give you answers, but pondering the questions of a random indie darling puzzle platformer can be just as meaningful. Limbo, I hope that anyone who decides to enter the darkness you offer comes out the other side with something that they didn't have before. This may be a disappointing hope, but sometimes disappointment inspires you to be something different. Thank you, Limbo. Sincerely, Just a Video Boy. Okay, Limbo in the bag. What a beautiful little quaint little beautiful little game. I really also want to apologize for the wait times in between these videos. I promise moving forward that I'm gonna lessen it. Actually, if you go to my Patreon, I'm now giving weekly updates, exclusive video essays, and polls as to upcoming videos. Also, I'm uploading every script I write for one of these videos, so if you want to read that, it's on the Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, Mazzy, Eve, Candid Bees, and I'm gonna call you Dopey. Thank you, genuinely. Your guys' support really does mean a lot for me. But for the next video, it will be the spiritual successor to this lovely game, and as of right now, Playdead's only other game. And that game is Inside. Hopefully, and maybe assuredly, that video will be here a lot sooner than you might expect. We'll see. Right. Before I go, no matter what limbo we get lost in, I'll always be just a video